The house was quiet but not in the comforting way it used to be. It was the kind of silence that pressed down on me, made the air feel heavy. I sat on the couch, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, not really seeing anything, just moving my thumb up and down, lost in the loop of nothingness. My husband was still at work. Again. At least that's what he told me. Lately, his long nights had become so common I stopped questioning them. The first few times I'd asked, he'd sigh, rub his face like I was exhausting him, and mutter something about deadlines. Eventually, I learned to keep my mouth shut. Our conversations were minimal, like two coworkers sharing the same office, speaking only when necessary. Even when he was home, he wasn't really there. He'd eat dinner without looking up from his phone, mumble a quick good night before rolling onto his side in bed. I stopped counting how many times I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when we'd become strangers living under the same roof. I tapped on a notification. A message. Coffee after your next workout? My stomach tightened. A small thrill pulsed through me before I even finished reading it. I shouldn't have felt that way. But I did. I told myself it was just coffee. Nothing more. A casual break in the day, a harmless moment between two people who happened to enjoy each other's company. That's how I justified it as I sat across from him, the scent of freshly brewed espresso filling the air. His eyes never left mine, and when he laughed, it wasn't the polite, distant kind I'd grown used to. It was warm, genuine, the kind that made me feel seen. I barely touched my drink, too caught up in the way he listened, how he leaned in just slightly as if every word I said mattered. I told myself I was imagining the way his fingers brushed mine when he reached for his cup, that the pause before he pulled away was accidental. It wasn't. I knew it, but I let it happen. That night, my husband came home late again. He muttered something about work, didn't ask about my day, didn't notice the way my mind was somewhere else. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized something unsettling. I had missed feeling wanted. And now I did. The cafe was warm, the kind of place where time slowed down, where laughter didn't feel forced. He sat across from me, his smile easy, his eyes locked onto mine like I was the most interesting person in the room. We talked about nothing and everything, travel, music, the kind of coffee we liked. Every joke landed, every glance lingered just a little too long. It felt effortless, dangerous in its simplicity. When we stepped outside, the air was crisp, the sun dipping below the horizon. I started to say goodbye, but he reached for my hand, his fingers wrapping around mine, firm but careful. My breath caught, and before I could process it, his lips brushed against mine. Soft, quick, a moment so fleeting yet so heavy it sent a shock through my entire body. I pulled back instantly, heart pounding, but he didn't look apologetic. He just smiled as if he knew something I didn't. Driving home, my hands trembled against the wheel. This wasn't supposed to happen. But the worst part? I wasn't sure if I wanted it to stop. It was subtle at first. A kiss on the forehead before he left for work, a hand resting on my lower back as he passed by, a question I hadn't heard in months. How was your day? I answered without thinking, but something about the way he looked at me made my stomach twist. That night he came home earlier than usual, sleeves rolled up, a bottle of wine in hand. Let's cook together like we used to, he said, and for a moment, I almost believed we were us again. The kitchen smelled like garlic and butter, our voices filled the space, and when he reached across the counter to tuck my hair behind my ear, I felt the ghost of something familiar. But then my phone vibrated. I hesitated, then glanced down. A message. I can't stop thinking about that kiss. My breath hitched, fingers tightening around the phone. Across from me, my husband laughed at something, completely unaware. My heart pounded. He was trying now, but all I could think about was the way someone else's lips had felt against mine. And I didn't know how to stop. I told myself it had to stop. The messages, the lingering glances, the way my heart raced when I saw his name on my phone. It wasn't real, just a distraction, a temporary rush that would only lead to disaster. So I ignored the last text, left him on read, and focused on what mattered. My marriage. That night, my husband suggested dinner at our favorite restaurant. Candlelight flickered, soft music played, and for the first time in a long while, it felt like he was really looking at me. His fingers brushed against mine as he poured the wine, his voice low, warm, familiar. When he leaned in, his lips found my neck, pressing softly just like he used to. But something was wrong. The touch felt rehearsed, practiced, as if he was going through the motions of what a husband should do. I forced a smile, swallowed the unease. Later, passing the bathroom, I saw his reflection in the mirror, his collar slightly open, a faint smudge of lipstick just above the fabric. Not mine. My breath caught. I wasn't the only one keeping secrets. I should have said something. Called him out right there, asked whose lipstick it was, demanded the truth. But I didn't. Instead, I swallowed the words, forced a smile, and let the doubt settle deep inside me like a weight I couldn't shake. The next morning, while he was in the shower, I reached for his phone. The screen lit up, but the familiar layout was gone. Everything was locked behind new passwords. My stomach twisted. He never used to hide anything. I put it back, hands trembling, my mind racing. That evening, while he was at work, I dug deeper. His jacket still smelled like expensive cologne, something stronger than he normally wore. In his pocket, a folded receipt, steakhouse downtown, a meal for two, dated the same night he'd claimed he was working late. My pulse pounded in my ears. He was lying. And just as that thought fully sank in, my phone buzzed. A message. Your husband is hiding something. My breath caught as I stared at the screen. Not from the trainer. This was someone else. Someone who clearly knew more than I did. I needed answers. The message kept replaying in my mind, each word tightening around my throat like a noose. My husband was hiding something and someone out there knew what it was. I texted back. Who is this? No response. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, then did the only thing that made sense. I reached out to a colleague. He was well connected, always knew the office gossip before it even happened. When we met for drinks after work, he leaned in, voice low, deliberate. I saw him, he said, swirling the ice in his glass. With someone. Not a coworker. My stomach flipped, but before I could press for details, he smiled, eyes lingering a little too long. But why waste time worrying about him? His hand brushed against mine, subtle, testing. I should have pulled away. Instead, I let it happen. When my husband texted that night, working late. Don't wait up. I stared at the words, my decision already made. He was lying. And so, for the first time, I let myself do the same. I agreed to meet my colleague again. This time, I wasn't looking for answers. The evening started with a quiet hum of conversation, the low glow of the bar lights casting shadows across the table. I sat across from him, the colleague who had become something more than that. His eyes held something I couldn't name. Curiosity, temptation, maybe just amusement at how easily I had stepped into this game. My drink sat untouched as his fingers traced the rim of his glass, his words slow, deliberate. You're still thinking about him, aren't you? He wasn't wrong. Even as I sat there, my husband's face flashed through my mind. His quiet distance, the lipstick on his collar, the lies slipping effortlessly from his lips. But I didn't stop. The tension between us grew, subtle glances turning into something heavier, a pull neither of us acknowledged but both felt. Time blurred and I let myself get lost in it, in the attention, in the way his hand lingered on mine. Then everything shattered. A shift in the air, a presence I felt before I even saw him. My stomach turned to stone. Across the bar, standing in the doorway, was my husband. His eyes locked onto mine, unreadable, unmoving. He didn't speak, didn't make a scene. He just stood there for a moment, long enough for my breath to catch, long enough for reality to crash down on me. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. Panic surged through me. I bolted from my seat, barely registering my colleague's voice behind me. The cold night air hit my skin as I rushed home, dread sitting heavy in my chest. I needed to explain, to say something, anything. But when I reached our bedroom, my heart stopped. Suitcases. His clothes neatly packed, his side of the closet empty. He was standing by the door, calm, composed, completely unreadable. Now we're even, he said, voice quiet but sharp enough to cut. And just like that, he was gone. I called. Once, twice, 5 times. Each ring felt like a punch to the stomach, each silence on the other end a confirmation of what I already knew. He wasn't going to answer. I texted. Please, let's talk. No response. I stared at the screen, the emptiness stretching around me, pressing down like a weight I couldn't lift. My husband was gone. He had made his decision and I was left standing in the ruins of mine. I opened my messages, searching for something familiar, something that felt solid. The trainer. The last conversation still sat there, but there were no new messages, no invitations, nothing. I hesitated, then typed. Hey, how have you been? Delivered. No reply. Hours passed. Then a day. Then he wasn't reaching out. He had moved on. I checked my colleague's messages, half expecting the usual flirty remark, a playful reminder that I wasn't alone. But the chat was empty. He had read my last text. No response. My stomach twisted. The truth settled in, cold and final. They were gone. And I was alone. I wasn't ready for the final blow, but it came anyway. A mutual friend let it slip. My husband had been seeing someone. Not a long-time affair, not some deep emotional betrayal. No, it was calculated. A part of his revenge. He had known. He had watched, waited, and when the moment was right, he made sure I felt everything he had felt. The lipstick, the sudden warmth, the illusion of him trying. It was all part of his plan. And now he was gone. I checked his office schedule. Business trip. Except it wasn't. He had left for good, packed his life into a suitcase while I was too distracted to notice. I went to the bank that afternoon needing a distraction, but what I found made my blood run cold. A new loan. My name on the paperwork. Thousands of dollars withdrawn. He had planned this from the start. The walls of my life collapsed around me. My marriage was gone, my finances ruined, my reputation shattered. I had lost everything. And the worst part? I had no one to blame but myself.